Deer stepped between the narrow trunks just after dawn, hooves pressing into the soft layer of moss that blanketed the forest floor. Morning usually came alive here, birds stirring, branches swaying, shadows sliding slowly with the rising sun. But today, the woods lay still, as if caught mid-breath. Deer paused, ears cupping forward. No birdsong, no rustle of waking creatures, not even the whisper of wind through needles and leaves. The forest slept, not peacefully, unnervingly. She took a cautious step. Her hoof sank silently into moss, leaving a print that should have darkened the shadow beneath her. But the shadow stayed the same size, the same shape, flat and unbothered. She lifted her leg again, then slowly placed it down, watching carefully. Still the shadow didn't move. Deer flicked her tail, testing it. Her tail swung gently. Her shadow did not. It lay pinned to the ground like a painted stain, a dark smear that refused to follow its owner. Her breath caught. She turned in a slow circle. The sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, creating spots of brightness on bark and stone, but none of the shadows those trees cast shifted with the light. They clung stubbornly to one shape, stretched in the wrong direction. She approached an old pine whose shadow should have leaned west. It pointed north, permanently. Deer lowered her nose to the dark shape. It didn't waver or soften when she touched it. Her muzzle met only earth, cool, lifeless, but the darkness beneath remained perfectly sharp-edged, as if carved into the ground. She stepped back, muscles tightening. The forest watched her. She felt that now. Not with eyes, not with motion, with stillness too intense to be natural. Deer walked deeper in, each movement careful and quiet. Normally the sound of her steps would stir birds or squirrels, but the underbrush held its silence. She passed beneath branches that seemed heavy with sleep, needles sagging as if they couldn't remember how to ripple in the morning breeze. She came upon a clearing she knew well, a place where sunlight usually danced in rippling patterns on the ground. Today, the light fell in straight, unbroken shafts. The shadows of the trees surrounding the clearing remained rigid, frozen in shapes that made no sense with the position of the sun. Deer tested the air again. Nothing. She moved into the clearing, breath trembling. Her shadow stretched in front of her, long and dark, but stayed that length even when she stopped moving, even when she turned. It wasn't her shadow. It was a fixed idea of her shadow, trapped in a place that no longer understood how light worked. The forest floor suddenly trembled. A faint, delicate shiver that tickled the edges of her hooves. Not enough to threaten her, just enough to say, "I am awake." Deer whipped around, expecting to see something emerging from the undergrowth, but nothing moved. All the shadows remained motionless. All the trees remained still. Yet the forest no longer felt asleep. Deer stepped backward instinctively. Her fixed shadow jerked a fraction, not following her, not matching her, but correcting itself, as if trying belatedly to imitate the movement it had failed to understand. Deer froze. Her shadow froze too. Her breath left in a thin cloud. The forest pulsed again, soft and slow. Not threatening, not hostile, just alert, as if realizing for the first time that something had entered its stillness. Deer took one more step backward. Every tree shadow in the clearing twitched in the same wrong direction. Deer's heart knocked against her ribs. The shadows weren't ignoring her. They were watching her, all of them, and none of them knew how to move. Deer stood trembling at the edge of the clearing, her breath misting faintly in the cold morning air that should have warmed long ago. The shadows around her, those rigid black shapes glued unnaturally to the forest floor, remained still, their edges too sharp, their positions too deliberate. But the longer she stared, the more she sensed them watching her in return. She took a slow step to the right. Her own shadow twitched, not with her movement, but after it. A short, abrupt jerk. Then it froze again, slightly misaligned with her body. Deer's ears flicked in alarm. She moved her head. The shadow delayed, then snapped its head shape into place, a fraction too far, as if overcorrecting. Deer's pulse hammered. She stepped backward quickly. This time, the shadows of the surrounding trees responded, not hers alone. A dozen long, dark shapes jerked across the ground by a few inches, all in the same clumsy arc, not matching the direction of her step. They moved late, crudely, like a forest of limbs trying to imitate without understanding the mechanics. Deer turned sharply toward them. The shadows froze mid-motion, caught in distorted positions. Some leaned forward too much, others stretched too wide. One tree's shadow bent at its trunk as if the tree had nodded, but the tree itself had not moved. Deer took 2 more steps back, hooves lifting lightly from the moss. The tree shadows heaved several inches closer, far too close, closing the gap not by creeping, but by jumping into their new positions. Deer stumbled in fear, nearly losing her footing. The shadows corrected again, not toward her, but around her, as if trying to form a circle whose shape they couldn't yet understand. The forest pulsed. A faint trembling sensation slid under the moss, rippling outward from the trees. It was not enough to shake the ground, only enough to tell her that the forest was aware, awake, trying. Deer lowered her head cautiously, testing the air. Her shadow lowered its head too. 2 seconds late, then jerked upward when she didn't. Deer whipped her head up in alarm. Her shadow lagged, then shot up too fast, overshooting, stretching its neck shape too high before shrinking it abruptly to match her. The motion was so wrong that Deer flinched away from her own dark double. The forest answered her fear instantly. A dozen tree shadows lunged inward by a hand's width, their movements silent but unmistakable. The trees themselves did not sway, did not budge, yet their shadows bent toward Deer as though called. Deer bolted toward the nearest patch of sunlight. Her hooves pounded silently on the moss. The sunlit patch glowed weakly, a pale invitation. She leaped into it, but her shadow did not follow. It stayed behind in the clearing, frozen in mid-run, its legs stretched long and wrong, as if plastered to the ground by unseen hands. Deer stared at it in horror. Her shadow looked back, upright now, standing on rigid legs that didn't belong to her movement. It turned its head the way she did, but too slowly and too smoothly, like a thought becoming action. Then it stepped toward her. Her shadow stepped, not with her, after her. The shadows of the trees shifted too, each in a staggered, learning rhythm, 1 first, then 3 more, then another pair, attempting to mimic the step her own shadow had taken. They formed lines, slanted arcs, loose patterns. The forest floor darkened in places where too many shadows clumped, creating patches of unnaturally deep black. Deer backed away as the tree shadows dragged themselves nearer, dragging long smears of darkness like paint across the ground. She lifted 1 hoof. 20 shadows lifted their hoof-shaped halves too, though none of them belonged to animals. They didn't understand the form. They were guessing. Deer lowered her hoof sharply. The shadows slammed their shapes down a moment later. The impact produced no sound, but Deer felt it. A jolt of pressure under her ribs. The forest pulsed again. The trees themselves finally moved, just barely, a faint whisper of branches shifting without wind. A hesitant reaction, like a student repeating a lesson in the wrong tone. Deer felt her breath thin. The forest wasn't asleep anymore, it was practicing. Practicing movement, practicing light, practicing her. She turned to flee deeper into the woods. Her shadow, lagging behind, stretched, twisted, and flicked into place beneath her feet, as if the forest refused to let her run without it. Then the tree shadows followed, moving in a broken wave, shifting toward her with stiff, unnatural corrections. Deer realized then the forest wasn't trying to trap her. It was trying to learn how to wake by copying the only moving thing it had, and it wanted her to keep teaching. Deer ran. Her hooves struck the moss in fast rhythmic bursts, and the forest finally responded, but in all the wrong ways. Shadows peeled from beneath the trees in jerking motions, stretching across the forest floor like patches of tar dragged by invisible hands. They didn't flow, they didn't glide, they jumped from one position to another in stiff, fragmented steps, as if learning how movement worked by watching her and failing to replicate it. Deer leapt over a fallen log. Her shadow followed, but only after she landed, snapping into a leaping shape that didn't match her landing. Its legs were too long, its form bent at an awkward angle. It looked like a memory of the motion, distorted and unfinished. The tree shadows tried to mimic the leap too. They rose upward from the forest floor in thin vertical smears, stretched into arching shapes, then slammed down again without any regard for the shape of the real branches that cast them. Deer stumbled, horrified, as one tall pine's shadow jerked upward, standing like a creature trying to rise. It pushed higher, lengthening along the trunk as if pulling itself up the tree rather than away from it. The top of the shadow bent forward, forming a crude head shape, though the tree had no such tilt. The shadow's edges flickered, straining to understand how a vertical creature should look. Deer backed away. The upright shadow snapped downward, collapsing into a flat smear, then rose again, faster this time, and again. Learning. Deer bolted to the left. Every shadow in the clearing lurched in the same direction as though dragged by a single command. Most of them lagged behind her, but a few had begun to correct their timing. They no longer jumped wildly, they slid in half steps, smoother than before, practicing. The forest pulsed. A low, slow tremor rolled through the earth beneath her hooves. No branches moved, no leaves rustled, but the pressure spread outward like a ripple of awareness. Deer stopped abruptly. Her shadow did not stop. It kept running forward for several more bounding strides until it realized she had stopped. Then it froze, then snapped back toward her in a single lurch. Deer's heartbeat hammered. She lifted her front right hoof. A ring of shadows around her lifted the equivalent shape, not elegantly, but in clumsy imitations. Some lifted nothing but an amorphous limb, others raised too many legs. Deer lowered her hoof slowly. The ring lowered in staggered sequence, late, mismatched, but trying. A noise escaped her throat, a soft, frightened grunt. The forest reacted instantly. Every shadow jerked upright. Not fully, some only partially rose, heads forming where no heads should be, but they all responded to her sound. Deer spun and ran. The shadows followed in a ragged wave, some sliding across roots and stones, some stretching until they tore, only to reform again in smoother outlines. They were learning faster now. Her speed taught them. Her panic sharpened their imitation. She vaulted across a narrow streambed. Her shadow attempted the same, but the water's reflection refused to accept it. The shadow shattered across the surface, splitting into shards that reassembled on the opposite bank after a moment of frantic flickering. Deer landed hard. Her knees wobbled. The trees on either side cast long shadows that moved as she did, not because the light changed, but because the shadows chose to shift with her. One shadow broke away from its tree entirely. It detached at the base, sliding free like a spilled pool of ink. It wobbled upward, forming long legs, a thin torso, a head shape that bent too far to one side. It swayed, struggling to balance without an anchor. Deer froze. The shadow froze too. She inhaled sharply. The shadow inhaled, visibly, its torso expanding in a swelling motion, despite having no substance. Deer stepped backward. The shadow stepped forward. Its legs elongated without bending. Its head jerked into a deer-like curve, copying her silhouette too literally, too quickly, like a creature scrambling to match a shape it barely understood. She shook her head violently. The shadow's head shook, delayed, erratic, then steadied itself, correcting its angle until it mirrored hers. The forest pulsed again, deeper this time. More shadows rose, dozens, some tall and thin, some bent and crooked, some half-shaped incomplete attempts at animals that had once passed here. They didn't surround her yet. They simply stood, waiting, learning. Deer lowered her body slightly, preparing to bolt. Every shadow lowered in a disjointed wave, some falling too far, some not far enough. Deer tensed for flight. The forest tensed with her. She took one step, and every shadow took one step. This time, mostly in sync. The forest had learned enough. It was no longer trying to copy her, it was trying to move with her. The forest held its breath. Deer stood trembling in the shallow streambed, water untouched beneath her hooves. The shadows that had risen around her, crooked, stretched, half-formed, remained frozen in their mimicry of her stance. They had learned to follow, they had learned to react, but now for the first time they hesitated, as if waiting for something more. Deer lifted her head slowly, her ears swiveling toward the canopy of unmoving branches above. The forest was silent in every direction, but the silence had changed. It wasn't the empty hush of sleep. It was the sharpened stillness of attention, of something poised at the threshold of action, but not yet knowing how to begin. A single shadow stepped forward, not hers, not tied to any tree, the one that had broken free earlier. It moved more smoothly now, its legs bending, incorrectly, too fluid in some places and too stiff in others, as if practicing new joints. The shape of its head adjusted itself with tiny flickers of darkness, repeatedly correcting until it formed a crude deer-like silhouette. Deer backed away from it. The shadow mirrored her perfectly this time, not delayed, not overshot, but matched. This new precision terrified her more than all its failures. She turned sharply. The forest turned with her. Every shadow shifted at once, moving in a coordinated sweep across the ground. They no longer jerked or twitched. They flowed, smooth ribbons of darkness sliding over moss and gravel as if friction did not exist for them. Deer bolted. The shadows didn't lag. They didn't jump wrong. They followed. They poured through the forest like a silent tide, matching her stride length, her speed, her turns. Their shapes refined with every movement, smoothing edges, correcting proportions. The rising sunlight didn't bend them, didn't distort them. They were no longer obeying light at all. Deer's breath came in sharp bursts as she fled deeper into the woods, hooves pounding through patches of moss and earth. But the shadows did something new. They began to rise. One at first, the same detached shape that had been practicing, its form thickened, not darkness deepening, but density changing, as if the shadow were gaining weight. It pulled upward, dragging itself into the air like a creature climbing out of a flat world. It became taller than Deer, taller than the trees around it. Its limbs stretched without tearing now, shaping into long, sleek legs. Deer stumbled to a halt. The rising shadow halted, too, then eased downward, shrinking itself, adjusting to her height again. It wasn't trying to tower, it was trying to match. Deer stepped backward in horror. The shadow stepped forward. Its legs bent at the correct angles now. Its head bowed in a deer-like curve. Its silhouette smoothed as though it were sculpting itself moment by moment into something that could truly stand beside her. The forest pulsed. This time, the tremor was not soft. It reverberated through the earth, through the trunks, through the bones hidden under bark. Even the frozen light seemed to react, the patches of sunlight on the ground flickering for the first time as if reality itself trembled. Deer whipped her head toward the trees, their shadows bent. Not in response to light, but in response to her. Branches above did not move, but their shadows drifted, rising up trunks like smoky tendrils, merging into larger shapes. They gathered into forms, animals, half-animals, guesses, echoes of creatures the forest had once seen. Dozens of deer-like silhouettes formed, dozens of almost deer, all facing her, all waiting for her next move. The first shadow, the one nearly complete, took a slow step. Its hoof shape touched the ground, and for the first time it made a sound, a tiny, crisp tap. Not the thud of a real hoof, not the whisper of shadow, but something new, A clumsy newborn noise as the shadow tried to inhabit weight. It stepped again. Another tap. Stronger. The forest pulsed again. Deeper now, an undercurrent of awakening. The nearly formed shadow took a third step. This one made a clean, solid sound. Deer's breath hitched. The shadow wasn't just moving, it was becoming. It walked toward her with careful precision, learning balance with each step. It lowered its head to meet hers, its movement startlingly accurate. The edges of its silhouette flickered only faintly now, stabilizing with each approximation. Deer stepped backward. The shadow stepped forward, not mimicking any more, but approaching as if greeting her. The forest held its breath. Sunlight brightened, but no shadow shifted in the natural way. The trees remained perfectly still. Only the constructed forms moved, their imitation growing closer to life with each passing moment. The nearly formed shadow lowered its head again, so close she could feel the cold absence of heat where its muzzle should be. The moment stretched. Then the shadow gently pressed its forehead to hers. A connection without touch. A gesture without warmth. A greeting from something learning how to exist. Deer staggered back. The shadow followed, and the shadows behind it took a collective step. The forest pulsed once more. Then, with a single unified motion, every shadow in the clearing took its first real step toward her.